Welcome to the HFMAtalk podcast, the podcast for NHS finance. I'm Alex Hunt, and in today's episode, we're bringing you a recording of a recent session from our pre-accounts planning event, our annual event designed to assist all those involved in the planning and delivery of the 2025-26 annual report and accounts. In this session, chaired by Debbie Paterson, Senior Technical Manager at the HFMA, we hear from Gary Mincher, Finance Manager at Wye Valley NHS Trust, and Ian Howse, Key Audit Partner at Deloitte, as they discuss the importance of working well with your auditor, including best practices, the important questions to ask, and building a positive relationship. Let's get into the conversation.
My name's Debbie Paterson. I'm the Senior Technical Manager here at the HFMA, and I'm chairing this session. I'm delighted to welcome a couple of ex-colleagues of mine, actually, Gary Mincher and Ian Howse, who are going to talk about working well with your auditors. I'll let you work out which one's the auditor and which one's the auditee, but over to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks. Debbie and I caught up over a coffee break at a conference a few months ago. Debbie was asking how it was going. We worked together a couple of years ago and how the job's been going since, and joining Wye Valley NHS Trust, which for those who don't know, is based in Hereford and serves the surrounding populace, branching out into areas of Wales as well, living on the borders as it does. So it was really to talk about the journey, certainly from my angle anyway, to talk about the journey that the Trust has gone on in coming from a late submitter of audited accounts and all the problems that caused for not just for the Trust, to where we got to last summer. The 24-25 accounts were actually submitted 2 or 3 days early, fully audited, nice big green ticks signed, and there's been quite a journey to go on. I'm doing this talk, I'm basking in reflected glory really, because I was lucky to join the Trust at a time. It had gone through a management of change process, there'd been a finance restructure, so there was a lot of change had gone on that predates me and was undertaken by greater beings than mine. But I'm always the gobby one in any team, so they were like, yeah, Gary, you can pick up the Trust and talk about the journey we've gone on. So it is about how do we build strong and effective and collaborative relationships with our auditors? So basically a step back as to why good audit relationships matter. Well, they support smoother audit cycles, and it reduces the amount of rework and delays. When I started at the Trust, I did have a small nervous breakdown. People may have witnessed me crying in the kitchen, but we had multiple, I can't remember how many, upwards of a couple of dozen versions of the draft accounts. There are now 2 versions of the accounts now. There's the draft, which, as the name suggests, gets sent to the auditors at the end of April, and there's the final, which is the audited version towards the end of June. We do maintain a log of changes in between those 2 versions, but anybody that's created a version to test out a note or something like that, those are very much kept in an archive, and there is one version of the truth. I'll talk a bit about that later as well. But this has resulted in actual, savings for my nervous system, saving money for patient care. We did manage to reduce our audit fees, but it saved time for the finance staff. It saved resources for patient care. It's freed up the audit staff. It does free up wider finance team to do the other stuff that absolutely that has to be done. It enhances our accuracy and our compliance. It's a mantra of mine that if year-end accounts, or month 12 as they're sometimes referred to, if they're materially wrong when put under the lens of audit, then what have we been reporting from months 1 to 11? Clearly that's been materially wrong as well. So it's about improving that accuracy and compliance. It's about building trust and transparency. But it's not just about the auditors. They're not our only stakeholders. They are a stakeholder in the organisation, but so are our patients, so are the staff, so are the public, so are the NHS England, the government, the taxpayer. We're improving trust and transparency for all all our stakeholders. It's not just about getting a tick in the box from the auditors because that's what the group accounting manual says we must do. It's much wider than that. So we're preparing in advance. So, the work starts now, whenever now is. And it's about understanding the audit scope and the audit timeline. And having seen it from both sides, as I say, not an auditor like Ian, but there's always an audit plan, and it's working together and understanding that plan and the scope and the timelines. And we've successfully done that over the past couple of years. We've met with Deloitte about the audit plan, and clearly one of the challenges for the auditors is having the right resource at the right client at the right time to get all the testing done by the final submission date. So we work together and we look together at that. Availability of key personnel. So if week 3, the auditors we're going to look in depth at payroll, but the payroll manager happens to be away that week, then we can work together to make sure the key personnel are available when the auditor is available to do the work, so that it smooths out the whole process for both sides. We did manage to shift some testing dates around accordingly last year in last year's audit plan, and I were able to take some time out during the May half-term week. I'm able to go on holiday. But we had a new member of the team start a couple of years ago, just after I did, and he was he came from commerce and industry, and he was sort of, what's this? There's an embargo on annual leave for the first 3 months of the year. I can't even take just a few days off during that time. And so clearly we're doing the preparation that I've just talked about, but that's not the case at Wye Valley now. Within reasons, we do allow staff a little bit of downtime during the audit process if it's planned. And personally, I can say it paid dividends, because having that few days off, I came back really energised and in a different place to tackle the rest of the queries as they came through. We need to organise our key documentation early, produce working papers as they go along, and it's part of my role. I still must have an audit hat from when I worked in the trade, and I put it on. And as the working papers come through to me, I try and agree them to the balance in the accounts. And if I can't agree them to the balance in the accounts, I'll push back to the member of the team that's created the working paper and, come on, can we have a bit of transparency here? Where's this number come from? And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I often talked about neurodiversity. It's a hidden disability, but it's also a superpower, because if I can understand the working paper, then I'm damn sure the auditors will understand it. It's about aligning the internal teams again, so that feeds into the sort of availability of key personnel, making sure the people are there at the right place, the right time to meet with the auditors to help with the testing. And it's about identifying potential risk areas. Again, looking back to when I started with the trust and we didn't get the accounts finalised until October, I think it was. Comparing that to now, I mean, the Deloitte did the audit planning during the October. We're now into journal testing and into interim audit testing, which then informs the level of testing that they've got to do and where the big risks are for the final testing. And when the annual accounts process crashed into that sort of planning work, it left limited time to do on both sides, I would wager, but certainly on our side, to do the planning work and to do the interim work. And then we sort of got into a downward spiral of, yes, it's not going to look too great for next year's or for the final audit. Whereas in the first year that I was there, we got a positive result from the interim audit, and we dined out on that quite literally. I took my team out for lunch. In those identifying those risk areas, my boss took the ISA 260 report from the previous year, and it became the focus of a work stream. And we had regular meetings, the whole team with the associate directors of finance sat down and went through the ISA 260, and and it became our action plan of things that we had to get right, or at least be moving towards and having a plan in place for the final accounts, and that really paid dividends. Having the associate CFOs on side as well and sort of leading that helped change the culture that may have pervaded and get us into a more audit focused, more audit ready organisation.
I think that was critical, and the dialogue that went alongside that, which was, you made this point, what did you really mean by that? Is this what you were looking for? We sort of iterated that as we went along. So I absolutely say that's critical, is that process of working with the auditor and providing examples of what you're thinking of doing, rather than just present it at the end and go, well, this is what we think you want. And we go, well, no, that wasn't what we meant at all. I think the dialogue that we maintain has really helped us avoid that. And I genuinely think the bit you talk about reviewing the working papers, I mean, so often I see audit working papers elsewhere where I go, well, I got one number here, I got one number there, they don't reconcile, there's no narrative notes to explain to me what might be going on, and I've just got a spreadsheet. And that's just, by the time we go back and forth a couple of times to work that out, you've wasted quite a bit of audit time. So it does make a huge difference if there is that initial review of the working papers the auditors are going to get. It's a big difference.
Thanks, Ian. And yeah, that's often been, I think throughout my NHS career, 1998, that's been kind of part of my role is reviewing the working papers before they end up on the file and being shared with auditors. Thanks, Ian. But the email has its place, and these instant messaging and etc. They have their place, but very often it's about the dialogue, and it's about actually walking down the corridor and going to see the auditors, or picking up the phone and speaking to the auditors, or if they're working remotely, we very often have a quick Teams call to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to testing. Talk about being proactive, and again, following on from what Ian says, it's about don't wait until the response date to ask your auditors, is this what you were looking for? Let's clear up any ambiguity before the response date and escalate issues within the team. Make sure people, and it goes to the audit team, it goes for our team as well. If any of the team come to me, they're not quite sure what the auditors are after or where to get the information, they'll come to me. So, it's about keeping that sort of proactivity going on. Make sure the responses are complete and accurate. And again, as Ian said, two separate numbers on two different spreadsheets that don't agree with one another. I mean, that's a bone of frustration for when I was working in audit.
And back to your point earlier, Gary, when that happens, it starts to undermine the confidence in the quality. And then the auditors start looking for things everywhere. They start seeing shadows everywhere. Whereas if it all ties up, they gain confidence, they feel more comfortable that, it's working. And it really does flow. It can make quite a difference to the approach to the audit, just that confidence that things are tying together and working. And one of the things the Trust does really well is say to me, look, we're thinking of doing this year end, or we've got a new lease that we're taking on. We're working on the IFRS 16 calculation. Can you have a look at it for us before the year end? And therefore, by the time we get to the year end, we've agreed on what the numbers should look like and how it should be treated. And I think things like that are really a significant difference to then, that bit's ticked off before we even start the year-end audit, because we've already seen it. It's exactly what we're expecting to see. It's been through our technical people if we need it, and there's no hold-ups for that. So fully support all of that, really.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, brilliant. So we aim to be responsive and collaborative with the auditors. We respond promptly to requests, hoping Ian won't chip in and say otherwise. And again, not long after I started, the associate CFOs and I undertook training with the whole team as to what a good working paper looks like. And we saw the lights switch on, and it was kind of news to some of the team that delaying audit requests and going beyond the deadline that the auditors have given you for the information, it looks like you've gone away and invented something that supports the balance in the account, rather than, here's the working paper and you've got it. And working with the auditors to solve problems, sometimes there are requests, and you may be relying on a third party to get the evidence. So it's not totally within your hands to provide that information. And that third party says, oh, Dave's away this week, can we give it you next week? But again, that's That's about escalating and being proactive and speaking to the auditors and working with them, and not waiting till the deadline day when they were because the auditors they're engaged and they're expecting to do a test on a particular report on that day. And if it's not available, then what's the auditor supposed to do with that chargeable time for that day? You can tell I've worked in audit.
Gary, I think it's been really, what we find really good is where the finance team they take ownership of the annual report as well as the accounts. Because quite often the annual report is prepared by other parts of the organisation. They are not really worried about the audit timelines, the audit committee dates that are coming up. They're not thinking in the same way as the finance team. And I think like yourselves, where you own that process and you're sort of on top of it internally, that can make a significant difference as well. Because we often find the annual report comes in much later than the accounts, is incomplete. We're chasing people up for the numbers. Somebody else has prepared them. They don't understand the audit process. So that part of the communication and ownership of finance of both elements, I think, is another key aspect of what we've achieved, really.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. That's it's a good point, well made. And we're looking to work with audit on, and it's everybody's favourite subject. I saw it come up in the previous presentation, but the remuneration report and some of the fair pay disclosures. I keep going to say fair play disclosure because my wife was secretary of a football club and she keeps talking about FA fair play rules. She knows them inside out, God bless her. But fair pay disclosures. And the GAM is a little unclear, a little ambiguous on some of its guidance. So working with the auditors before we get to the year end and make sure we're both interpreting the GAM the same way so we can produce the right figures the right first time, hopefully. There's a tricky one, that one, but again, clarifying expectations where needed. So it's about that dialogue and, being sure that we speak to the auditors, we go and see them, we have a phone call, we have a Teams call. I don't know how other trusts auditors work, but Deloitte's tend to be on site on a hybrid basis 3 days a week. So I'm in 3 days a week, my team are in 3 days a week, and then we're always just a phone call away when everybody's working remotely. So might be going over old ground with this, but there are common pitfalls to avoid. We'll talk again about delayed documentation because it's frustrating. It suggests that maybe you haven't got the numbers to hand, but you've had to go and make them up. I'm checking the time here because I can come out with anecdotes all day, but it's slightly off topic. But I can always remember we had one trust I worked. We had an outsourced payroll department, and we had a HMRC visit, and that was particularly stressful for me because some of the records were in our offices, some of them were in the outsourced payroll provider's office. So they went to the outsourced payroll as pre-agreed. The tax inspector turned up at the outsourced payroll office, and and was greeted by "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Straight away, it put his back up. I could see the tax bill rising as my stress levels were. So yeah, don't delay documentation, or at least be proactive if there is going to be a delay, and speak to people, let them know in advance. Incomplete evidence, again, doing that working paper review. I spent some time at a previous organisation with a management accountant trying to understand where they'd put an accrual in from, and gosh, there were spreadsheets and linked spreadsheets and VLOOKUPs to pivot tables, etc., etc. In the end, then they presented me with an income contract. So this was the income they were getting from some source of funding. So you're telling me you've accrued to budget? Was the conclusion I came to. And then I went off on a bit of a Basil Fawlty rant of, well, we can get rid of all the management accountants then because we can just accrue everything to budget. There's no variance analysis because there'll be no variances. Perhaps that wasn't great, but so again, it's looking, make sure there's not incomplete evidence, make sure the evidence is there. Other common pitfalls, offensive or unclear communication. Again, during that HMRC visit we had, I know I'm going slightly off topic, but some of the records held at our trust were for people who sat on panels, and there were volunteers, and I think they got a nominal fee for the volunteering, plus volunteering expenses. Of course, HMRC by the time the payroll provider had royally brassed them off, they were looking at our records with a tooth comb, and they said, well, who are these people that sit on panels, and can we have their names and their NI numbers and their addresses, please, so we can triangulate with. So I spoke to the health records manager, whose approach was, what do they need that for? I was like, because they're the tax inspector. I'm like, well, unless they can come to me with a letter explaining under what act of Parliament they're requesting the information, then I'm not liable to provide it under data protection. You think, for goodness sake, just tell the taxman. So again, the tax bill went up further for that trust. But we don't want defensive or unclear communication with our auditors or any third party stakeholders. And Ian talked before about the lack of ownership. And as I say, I was lucky to join when I did, because trust when I did, because after the management change and the involvement of the associate CFOs, one of our associate CFOs is an external auditor, or a past ex-external auditor, and there's really driven this kind of whole team approach to audit. I hear horror stories from colleagues of years and years gone by when a senior member of the team on the financial management side, the dark side, took a view of their involvement in year end ended once they'd sent out the month 12 budget reports. So when the auditors came asking, why did a member of your team post this journal? What's the back in month 6 or whenever? They sort of closed the door to the auditor. As I say, we've managed to, in the past couple of years, we've turned that person's long since retired, I've been told. So I'm not speaking ill of anyone that's in current employment, but we've changed the culture of the organisation, and it was very much driven from greater beings than me. Moving on. So best practices for success. So it is about maintaining an audit-ready culture. I always have a mantra is that if you're maintaining proper books and records, you probably could produce, or you should be able to produce, a set of accounts and notes at any point during the year, not just the year end. So the year end preparation starts at month 1. We should document our controls thoroughly. I know nobody likes process notes and things like that. They're not the exciting forecasting spreadsheety stuff that we like to do, but they're very important. Audit requests centrally. And one of the big boons, post-COVID, all the audit firms, and possibly even pre-COVID, I don't know, but certainly I'm aware of it more post-COVID, the audit firms have got the tracking audit request tracking, even if I can make my words in the right order. Software, Deloitte's use Connect. There are various other iterations out there, other ones provided by other IT firms out in the market. Again, led by the associate CFOs, we have a daily audit catch-up meeting at 9:00 every morning. We take a download of the audit requests and we see how they're progressing, and if there's any bottlenecks, or if a member of the team's off sick, we can reallocate it to another member of the team, and the whole team approach, so it's shared out around the team, so that we're progressing these requests, and we can help each other out if anybody's stuck. And as I say, it's really, it's that 9:00 first focus. What's your priority for the day? It's for clearing these audit requests, and that has absolutely paid dividends. Conducting pre-audit walkthroughs, and again, that's me. That's part of my role. Part of what I do as the slowest member of the group. And again, it's about looking at those working papers or pieces of evidence provided during the audit testing. Is the figure just easy wins, like, is the figure easily identifiable when you open the spreadsheet on that first window, or do we have to scroll down to cell XZ10765 to find the number, which supports the balance in the accounts? Having that kind of mindset. So, in summary, strong auditor relationships lead to smoother audits, fewer issues, and better financial governance. But, they're translated into, as I say, savings, actual cost savings for us. It's about remembering to celebrate our successes as we go through. We had a meal after the positive interim opinion. We had a celebration after account submission as well. So we had that time as a team to reflect on our successes, and it's about continual improvement mindset. We're not perfect, I'm sure, we'll be the first to admit that, but we've made improvements. We'll continue to make improvements. The ISA 260 became our, what did my boss call it? The improvement plan for the first year. it's now become our good to great plan for subsequent years. So we're always mindful of the ISO 260 and what risks are in that and what we can do to improve next year. So we're still following the yellow brick road to the rainbow. And yeah, so
Brilliant. Thank you, Gary. Are you ready for some questions from me? I have got one for it. I'm going to start with Ian. It just occurred to me there, Gary was saying about the ISO 260 and it being their route to, I can't remember what you called it now, their route to better practice or best practice. Does that change the way you write the ISO 260, knowing that that's how it's going to be used?
No, I don't think it does necessarily, Debbie, but I think, we've always tried to improve them and add more flavour around what we think the trust is doing well, what we think they can improve. I think it also goes alongside a good debrief meeting after the session, usually when we've all had a chance to recover from the year-end process, but sitting down and going, what went well, what didn't go so well, and there's always things the auditors can do better as well as the audit team in the trust. None of us are perfect, and there's always ways in which we can all improve. Sometimes our communication, I read a request and I go, I don't know what we're asking for. Goodness knows how the trust knows what we're asking for. And that's where, Gary talked about the communication. Sometimes you just got to pick up the phone and go, what on earth are you after there? I never forget being told, I went asking for some complex document as a junior auditor, and I was told, oh, you mean the Red Book? And I was like, well, if only I'd known it was called the Red Book, then life would have been so much easier. But, there's always those bits where you can improve. We try to give as much flavour as we can of where improvement can be made in the ISO 260. They become longer documents, like everything, like the accounts have become longer, the annual reports become even longer, but we try and focus on some clarity around some tables in there where we think, the good practice areas are, and we try and track that over time as well, so as people can see the improvement. Because as Gary said, audit committees are keen to see improvement as well. So being able to track that transparently is really important.
That's really helpful. Thank you. One of my other thoughts was, Gary, you did some training for your team on audit and what was expected. But then Ian mentioned about the annual report, and you mentioned about your horrific HMRC experience where people don't understand, what the role of HMRC or audit and all these lovely people that come in and ask difficult questions. Have you done training outside of the audit team? Not the audit, the finance team. So, or outside of the financial reporting team. So with your management accounts colleagues, with your payroll colleagues, with whoever is running the stores who might get a visit from an auditor to say, show me how, walk me through your system. So what training do you do outside of the sort of the obvious people? That's a
good point, actually, Debbie. I mean, we do involve the management accounts and income and contracting teams in the training. There are, you do raise a good point, actually. There are wider teams that we can bring in. It tends to be more ad hoc, but it's a good point. It's something we should look to do, really. Anybody that's got any input into the annual report. I was just thinking about, when you mentioned stores, I was thinking about poor housekeeper who was tasked with doing a stock count on a computerized stock system. I didn't know the stock system, and they didn't know the stock system either. And it's one of those typical things where actually their manager had been barking at them because I told the manager it was important, we needed this stock count doing, etc. And the managers, as I say, just kept barking at them to get the stock done through this system. And then, how do I even log into the system? I managed to find a previous, and like all IT people, I have this notion in my head that IT people would be the worst driving instructors in the world because they just give the student the keys and say, just have a play around with it, see how you get on. But I managed to find a previous download from that stock system, which I, through an online converter, converted into an Excel spreadsheet, gave it to the poor housekeeper and said, are you familiar with Microsoft Excel? Oh, yes, fine. And it had got the prices in one column, so I just needed them to drop the quantities in the other column, and there you go, there's the stock value. Bits of ad hoc stuff like that, but you raise a good point. Perhaps we could widen that out a bit.
Thank you. Ian, I was fascinated by your comment about the annual report and the fact that in Wye Valley that it's the finance team that take control of it? Because I know that that's a common moan and groan, isn't it, with auditors of the annual report. So when you say they take control of it, presumably they're not producing it, or are they just taking control of, it is within their timetable? And
yeah, they own the timeline of completion. They know that other people are producing it, but they're constantly on that communication with the governance people, with the press secretary saying, is it on track? Is it on progress? What do we need to do, particularly with the remuneration disclosures? I see Graham's put in the comments there. I mean, it is a nightmare, and auditors do take slightly different interpretations. So yeah, if you've got a change of auditors, an early conversation on the way in which you do it would be very valuable, because the guidance is complex.
We're amongst friends here. I think we could say unhelpful.
Yeah, well, and also you are going to look at some of them and say, why are we disclosing some of this stuff in the way that we're doing it? Because it doesn't mean anything to anybody. But we could save a lot of time by cutting some of it out, possibly. But yeah, it's really one of the big frustrations is because Gary made a point about versions of the accounts. The same with I'm on version 17 of the annual report of one of my trusts. There's a huge amount of work every time we get a new version to check what's changed, what hasn't changed, and AI tools have made that so much easier and quicker than it used to be. But we still do call and cast and all of those things on and the numbers, make sure they're consistent. So yeah, a well-run process around the annual report that is timely and aligned with the accounts just makes a massive difference to the efficiency of the audit, because we're not having to go back and do bits. I mean, forever, I feel like the remuneration report testing is the last thing I ever get over the line somehow. And yet, could be done quite early on if we get it all in the right place at the right time. So, but it's owning that timeline and making sure you sort of take ownership of the fact it needs to be produced at the same time as the accounts, and it's not somebody else's responsibility, and you're not taking any ownership of that in finance.
I think that's a good point about ownership. Sorry, Debbie.
Carry on.
I think that's a key point actually in about ownership, and having that ownership, having somebody that owns the annual report. I mean, I can only speak from the accounts side of thing myself, but yeah, you need a bit of a Rottweiler to own the annual report, because there is a Rottweiler that owns the TAC forms and the accounts in my trust, and I bet you no prizes for guessing who that Rottweiler is, for his name sounds a bit like Gary Mincher.
Absolutely right. Okay, note for everyone. I was interested about, I did ask one of my questions you've answered, which was, who's on site? Because obviously post-COVID, that's very different. Back in the dark ages when I was an auditor, we were out there for months on end. We just lived in usually a cellar somewhere, didn't we? With no windows. But now, obviously, hybrid. So I was interested to hear that, it's 3 days on and 3 days off, or 3 days in the office and 2 days out. How do you communicate? I did hear a horror story of an auditor that would only communicate through email. And I was very pleased, Ian, for you to say sometimes you just have to pick up the phone, because to have that discussion. So you've got your log, but how is it a mixture? How do you communicate through the process?
We use Deloitte Connect in our case, but these tools, they're useful because everybody can see whether they've been replied to and everything else. So it does give both teams the same view of the information. I think that's very helpful. I mean, we do say to all of us, I've forever seen people emailing somebody in the room next door, and I'm like, get up, go next door, because there'll be 4 emails before you get to the answer you'll get to immediately by going in there and just exchanging conversation. And, the email, like everybody, when an email lands in my inbox, if it's instant, if it's easy, I'll deal with it instantly. If it's not, I ignore it, and then I might go back to it, or I might forget. And that happens the same when we raise queries. If it's a difficult one, somebody goes, I'll have to come back to that. And then you end up having to chase it. Whereas if you go and see them and they'll sit there with you and you'll work through it, and you probably solve it in 5 minutes, as opposed to a few days with email back and forth. But it's a constant battle for us to say to our people as well, look, just go and have a conversation, book some time in with that person. I think Teams works well enough on that. Quite often it's a lot easier to just have a Teams call and go, right, let's talk it through, share something on screen or drop it into the chat, and you can get through a problem quite quickly. Yeah, it's the hybrid thing can be very beneficial, but there's no substitute for simply speaking to people. It's so much quicker way of resolving things.
Yeah.
That's great, thanks, Ian. And that's one of the things I found with Deloitte's team is that I can put a Teams call in their diary with 5 minutes notice, and they'll pick up if there's a request and I don't quite know what they're after, or and we can sort that issue out really quickly. I'll pop a Teams call in. I know in 5 minutes I'll be talking face to face. On the days that they're not in the office, I'll be talking through the screen to the auditor, and we can share screens. And as Ian says, we can resolve the query that way. It takes minutes.
Right. Ian, I'm guessing you're reading the question that's come in from Angela, which I'm desperately trying to summarise. So basically, how do we make sure that the audit team ask for the same information in the same format and don't sort of all ask it for in different ways?
It's a really good one, Angela. If I had the answer to that, I'd probably be retired by now. But it is a challenge. I think that the method of using like our Deloitte Connect, our portal, is aimed at that. Is that one person puts it on, it should be straightforward to respond to it there. But unfortunately, what often happens, if things go to timeline, it's easier because you have a team that you've sort of booked and worked together. As soon as things go off timeline or somebody goes sick and the team switches, that's when it gets really difficult for us to stop people taking the initiative perhaps and asking for information that somebody else has already asked for without looking on the portal to see if it's been asked for, etc. And it does drive me to distraction because I'm like, first thing I do is look to see if we've asked for it before and see what answer we've had. Lots of people don't. They just fire off another request, and that's, not unique to us, but it is a challenge, particularly when the team changes. I'll give some thought, Angela, to is there something I haven't thought about to solve that problem, but it is an age-old problem, and unfortunately it does lead some inefficiency. And then when I have a conversation about overruns, which sometimes happens, we get that fired back at us, which is fair enough, and we have to accept that some of the inefficiencies down to us as well. Because, as I say, none of us are perfect. The audit team is perfect, not the one I've ever worked with anyway, over 30 years. There's always strong people, there's ones who are not so strong, there are people who do it really well and communicate really well, and there are others who aren't, and you have to try and make the best of a team that you're given for any one engagement. But I hope the portal is the means, and often I say to clients, look, if we have asked for this before, point my team to the answer you've already given. Yeah, that's fine, or raise it with me and I can try and have a word with somebody and say, check first, please. It's about that communication again. Like, I try and be as approachable as possible for anybody. I'm quite happy to listen to anybody say if we can do things better during the audit, then I'm here to try and do that.
That's really helpful. I think it is a good reminder, isn't it, that audit teams are also people as well as the finance team. We all have to remember that everyone is people and nobody comes to work to do a bad job. But some of us, we don't always get it right every time. So, yeah, okay. Well, perhaps one for all of us to have a ponder about. And yeah, whoever comes up with the answer can retire first. How's that as a plan? Right, this is a bit of a nasty one. So in the previous session, I don't know whether either of you were watching, we were talking about the IFRS 17 was raised. Obviously, IFRS 17 new this year, highly unlikely to be applicable to NHS bodies. So you are trying to prove a negative. So question for Gary, have you got your working paper ready? A question for Ian, have you had that discussion with Gary so that, what you're expecting to see and you've communicated that? So,
yeah, Ian's team asked last year, and the income. So we tasked the income and contract team with basically bolting it onto the work that they already do on IFRS 15. So while you're pouring through the contracts, have a look for using Debbie's word, the unicorn that might be an insurance contract in there, embedded somewhere in there. And so we had something to produce to auditors that we'd at least considered the impact of IFRS 17 rather than just going, no, it doesn't impact us. We had some logic behind it, and we've got something in the diary with the income and my team have got something in the diary with income and contracts to do something similar again this year, in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Ian, any thoughts on the joys of IFRS 17?
I mean, what we always talk about accounting papers, or, if somebody's done a paper that says, look, we've risk assessed our contracts. We think that the, most likely area where we might have one would be PFI or something else. We've reviewed those contracts, can't find any element of it. We've talked to our procurement people about any new contracts that might come in place in the year. And they've written that down for me, then that's a great starting point. But usually there's a bit of a risk assessment. As Gary said, you've got loads of contracts, probably very unlikely to have it in most of those, but there are some more complex ones where you think, actually, we probably need to have a good look at those. We've had a look at them we couldn't find anything, generally that's enough for me to put on file to say management have considered it. They've got a reasonable process. We would then perhaps build it into some of our testing on income contracts or whatever, or expenditure contracts, and just see if there's anything we can find. But I think a nice little paper that sets out, you've thought about it, you've done something, however limited that might be, is a great starting point. Rather than me ask the question, there's no piece of paper, no process, and as Gary said, they're making it up as they go along because, they haven't thought about it in advance. So it just makes it comfortable straight away.
Excellent, thank you. And of course, not just this year. So next year you'll have to dig out that working paper and say you've done something. Sadly it's not going away, is it?
And where we have to be a bit more careful is where you've got subsidiaries. They tend to be a bit more commercial. There's maybe some other things going on. So again, from your risk assessment, you'd probably be making sure that the people in the subsidiaries are aware of those things, because it could flow through in the group accounts and you might miss it because you've only thought of it from a sort of trust perspective.
Oh, that's really helpful, thank you. I have one last question, which is a little bit frivolous, but I thought let's end on a frivolous note because audit is anything but. So Gary mentioned the lovely journal that says agreed to budget, which is clearly a no-no in terms of documentation. Can you both give me if you've got any other favourite phrases to avoid on working papers or journal entries or things like that? It's not a test. If you can't think of any, that's fine. I thought, is there something else to avoid?
Well, it's interesting because we use data analytic tools, don't we, to look at journals. So, we're always looking out for words like fraud or hidden or, those sorts of words. So just think about, any of those words you might be putting on a journal that would flag up an analytic unnecessarily, so there's some of those things. What was it? Bribe. I can't remember. There's something that comes up every time and it's an innocuous word that just seems to come. Correction, adjustment. It needs a bit more. You're looking, those are all things that will flag us to do more work. So just have to think about whether there might be some words in there that might be construed to be, because mainly our journal work is about fraud. So, we are looking for the words that might trigger a fraud thing. Think about that, I guess. But
thank you. Let's end on that note. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was really helpful. I found it fascinating, really interesting, and confirmed my thought that I am very pleased that I am no longer an auditor. But thank you, Ian, for continuing the good work in the audit world, and thank you, Gary, for continuing to be audited well.
Thank you to Debbie, Gary and Ian for that session. The HFMA has produced a series of resources to support those involved in the planning and delivery of the 2025-26 annual report and accounts. We'll link it in the show notes. That's it for this week's episode of HFMA Talk. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to leave a 5-star rating on your favourite podcast platform. See you next time.